in the conversation at 914-636-0110. Now on 1460 WVOX, here's Greenburgh Town Supervisor Paul Feiner.
Good morning, Westchester. I'm Paul Feiner. I'm the Greenburgh Town Supervisor. And I was thinking while I was driving here, I knew my grandparents, but I don't know much about my great-grandparents or great-great-grandparents. And with us today as my special guest is Alan Bergman. And he's involved in an effort that could change that for future generations, because he grew up in Greenburgh, attended the Elmsford schools. He earned a Bachelor of Arts degree in Massachusetts Communications from the State University of New York, attended a business school at what's now NYU Tisch School of Business, and now is writing biographies for families that want to preserve their stories for future generations. So thank you very much for joining us.
Thank you, Paul, for having me. It's great to be here.
Could you tell us a little bit about your motivation for getting into the personal history biography business and starting Life Stories Preserved?
Sure, I'll be happy to. So I've always been fascinated by people's stories. I've always loved hearing the nuances of their lives. And I've been writing for many years. I was in a family business for 40 years, but all through that time, I was writing articles and blogs on the side. And after the business was sold, the family business was sold in 2018, I took my love of writing and my love of hearing people's stories, and I combined them, and I started my company, Life Stories Preserved, actually at the beginning of 2020.
And so basically what you do is you interview family members and then turn their stories into a book.
That's correct. I write and privately publish either individuals or couple stories. They've ranged from anywhere from 80 to 300 pages. And these are not meant for public consumption, but rather they are meant for sharing with family and friends and colleagues, etc.
And how long does it take you to write a bio?
So the first part of the process, obviously, is interviewing, a lot of interviewing, to learn the individual, the couple's stories. And then from there, it's all writing, creating the narrative. And typically the entire process takes me 3 to 4 months per book.
And is that almost like every day working on one?
So since I consider myself semi-retired, I do a half day's worth of work. And I'm sitting at my desk, usually about 4 hours each day, 5 days a week.
If somebody is interested in having a bio about themselves or family members, is it a very expensive proposition?
So the cost is determined by a number of factors. Obviously, the number of pages, the number of copies to be printed, and I've printed anywhere from 15 to 400 copies on the books that I've completed, and also the number of different people that need to be interviewed to create that story. So there's not a hard and fast answer to, is it expensive? I kind of think of it as an investment in a family's past and a family's future.
Is there like a range?
Sure. So the books start probably in the $9,000 range, and they can go up to as much as the 20,000s, depending upon the factors that are involved.
Great. In terms of, do you have any other employees who, besides yourself, who are involved in the business?
So that's a great question, Paul. I have 2 employees that are working for me on a project basis. One is a professional graphic designer. All of the covers are professionally designed by him. And what I do is I give my clients a choice of usually 2, 3, or 4 different designs for the front cover. And then I also work with a proofreader. This is a woman who's a retired editor but she's just a fantastic proofreader. So I depend on both of them to get me through each of the projects that I work on.
That is that is great. We have to take a 5-minute break, and then we'll be right back with Alan Bergman, and he has a business where he'll write a book about you and your family, and you could use it and give it to them for to preserve their stories for future generations. I'm Paul Feiner, Greenburgh Town Supervisor.
WVOX. Now back to the Greenburgh Report on 1460 WVOX. Once again, here's Greenburgh Town Supervisor Paul Feiner.
I'm Paul Feiner, Greenburgh Town Supervisor, and when you're listening to this program, you're thinking about your great grandparents and really know practically nothing about them. This interview should be of interest because Alan Bergman has a company, and basically what he does is he turns family histories into books, which could be passed down for generations to come. Wouldn't it be nice if your great-great-great-grandchildren would be able to read about you generations, from now? I have a question. A lot of people don't have really exciting lives. And how do you write a book about somebody who thinks they may have a boring life?
That's an interesting question, Paul. So many people tell me, just as you just mentioned, that their lives have not been that interesting. And with a little bit of prodding, I get them to start talking, going way back to their childhood if possible. And as they're talking, the stories that they're revealing, the anecdotes that they're sharing, it turns out that they have had fascinating lives. So even though we may look at our own lives with a jaundiced eye and think, my life hasn't been that interesting, chances are that's far from the truth.
Could you tell us a couple interesting stories that from your books?
Sure, I'll be happy to. So I completed a book, a 150-page book in January about someone who had a tremendously successful real estate career in the state of New Jersey. But he started out life, he was born in a Nazi labor camp, transferred with his mother to a Nazi death camp, and he was hidden for the first 3 years of his life. He was hidden under a huge nightshirt that his mother wore 24/7, and his mouth was sometimes taped shut to keep him quiet, especially as an infant. And he calls himself the world's youngest Holocaust survivor, and that may be the case. I also did one book where, the gentleman had a very, very successful career in the food industry. But in retrospect, after retiring, he realized that his success in the corporate world was at the expense of his family. And he really wanted to get that down on paper. He wanted to tell that story. And the book almost serves as a semi-apology to his family members for not being around for so much of the time. And
do you also interview the family members as part of the book?
So typically, the biography subject is the person I spend the most time with. But whenever possible, I interview family members, friends, work colleagues, because each of these people will bring a unique perspective about that person, about the biography subject, to the table. And I've interviewed as many as 20 people for a single biography.
And does a family have the right, after you write the book, or to edit it and say, gosh, I don't want this information in?
So what I typically do is I submit proofs to my client about every 2 chapters, and they may object to a word, they may object to several pages, or they would like something just rephrased differently, or a different angle on something. So the answer is yes. The client does have final say in what actually gets published.
That is great, and there's also a lot of photos in the book.
Right. So what typically happens, the photos towards the beginning of the book are the oldest photographs, and each of the books that I've done start out with black and white photography and kind of move into color photography as the photos become more recent. And in addition to the photos, whenever possible, I include documents. They may be a passenger ship manifest when a person's forefathers came over from the old country, first emigrated to America. They may be naturalization papers. So typically every book, at the end of each chapter, there will be a combination of photographs and sometimes these different documents as well.
Do some people want like much more in the book than actually is in the book? Like, do they feel you're not capturing enough? There's people who are like quarters and they want every bit of their life told.
Well, sometimes I'll ask them as I'm hearing the stories. And by the way, most of these interviews are done online via a video chat software. It's kind of like Zoom on steroids. It's like Zoom, but it does many more things than Zoom can do. But sometimes these people will share stories or share information, and I will have to ask them, do you think that's really relevant to your story, or do you think that's really going to make for interesting reading?
Great. Do you find that people are giving the books only to family members, or do they also give it to friends? Well,
the book that I'm currently writing, my current project, the book is going to be distributed to 200 of the individual's employees at the company Christmas party in the first half of December. But most often, books go to family members first, and after that, close friends and maybe work colleagues also.
In terms of like the readership, if somebody's not a family member, but they're a colleague, do you think that people will take the time to read the whole book? What's your feeling?
They will certainly say that they read it.
Yeah.
Do they actually read it? Perhaps. Again, I think it comes down, at the end of the day, it comes down to the relationship between the biography's subject and the colleague or friend. I don't think there's any hard and fast answer to that question.
It's interesting because I got a book about Al Del Bello, that a similar book, Dee Del Bello, Al's widow, sent it to me, and I just got it like 2 weeks ago, and I read it actually cover to cover, and I found it was very, very interesting because I knew him, and I wanted to get a different feel about him, and it's surprising. When I saw it first, I was flipping through it, and then I said, "Oh, this is interesting." Then I ended up reading the whole thing over a weekend.
That's interesting. So obviously, I did not read Al Del Bello's book, but I think
it was the same concept.
The same concept. But I think many politicians' stories, especially if it's penned in their name, if it's written in their name, I think many politicians' stories have the tendency or the potential to be immodest. There may be a lack of humbleness in those books.
Right, so this is a little different. I'm Paul Feiner, Greenburgh Town Supervisor. We have to take a short break, and we'll be right back in a few minutes. And we're talking to Alan Bergman. How do people get in touch with you?
So, multiple part answer. I have a website, which is Life Stories Preserved. That's past tense. LifeStoriesPreserved.net. It has my contact information on there. I have an email address, which is info@lifestoriespreserved.net. So really either one of those, through my website or through my email address, usually work best.
Now back to the Greenburgh Report on 1460 WVOX. Once again, here's Greenburgh Town Supervisor Paul Feiner.
Hi, I'm Paul Feiner. I'm the Greenburgh Town Supervisor, and we're interviewing Alan Bergman, and he has a company that he formed, and he writes biographies of people so they can preserve their stories for future generations to come. What is the most unusual stories that you've written about?
Funny that you should ask that, Paul. So I did a book that was published in 2001, privately published last year. And the book, the biography, was written as a surprise to the subject of the biography. This was done, it was commissioned by his wife for his 80th birthday. And I ended up interviewing 17 people to assemble his life story. And then on his 80th birthday, which was December of last year, his wife handed him the completed book and said, "Here's your life story." And he was obviously flabbergasted. The 17 people who I interviewed put together an awfully accurate portrayal of his life story. But it was quite a surprise, obviously.
And what are you writing now?
So right now, I'm kind of involved in two projects right now. I'm writing the classic rags to riches story. This is an 86-year-old gentleman who grew up on the streets of East Harlem. He was born in 1936, exceedingly poor family, and today he owns a 100-foot yacht with a crew of 4. He owns a private airplane that seats 10. He has homes throughout the country, and he has 200 employees. Really just an interesting story. He was married at age 17, not by choice, and he really is just the classic success story and the classic story of realizing the American dream. But besides writing his book right now, I'm also speaking at a number of public libraries around the country, around the county, and these are workshops to teach memoir writing. Typically, it's a 1.5 to 2 hour workshop, a combination of lecture and writing exercises, and it's just to help individuals, mostly seniors, in fact, just to help them get started in bringing their memories to the forefront, getting them down on paper as narrative, and then saving them for their children and grandchildren, etc.
How do people prepare for the interviews?
So what I usually do is before each interview, I provide the interview subject with a list of topics to be discussed during that session, just to give them some time to prepare and to think about stories that may have occurred during a particular period of their lives. So the interview subjects are not a surprise, and they usually have about a week to prepare ahead of time.
And do they all prepare, or sometimes?
So usually the answer is yes, but sometimes, often in fact, some additional prodding is necessary, is required to perhaps just furnish more detail or reveal more of a particular story.
I wanted to know, are most of your subjects alive?
So of the 12 books that I've completed, only one person was deceased, had passed on about 15 years ago. And one woman whose story I wrote actually passed away in 2021. And she was a beloved individual. She survived COVID, she survived the Holocaust, and unfortunately she died from hitting her head on a cement sidewalk. But my other 10 biography subjects are alive and well.
Oh, that's great. What type of feedback do you get from your listeners, from your readers, from the families? I mean, sorry.
So I get many thanks. I think people are grateful, and again, these people would not have contacted me in the first place if they didn't feel strongly about saving family history, saving an individual story. So these are people who are for the most part on board to begin with, but I get a lot of gratitude, which makes me feel wonderful as well, obviously.
And how do you get the clients?
So most of my clients have come from word of mouth. The book that I'm writing right now, his lawyer, the individual's lawyer, got in touch with me because I had written a book for another one of the lawyer's clients. So he knew of me already. So for the most part, it's word of mouth. I do a little bit of old-fashioned snail mail marketing, letters to people who I think have an interesting story to share. So really a combination of factors. And the first book that I did for a neighbor of mine, a fellow in his 80s who had taken over a family business, who lost a 5-year-old child to leukemia. He's had a lot of ups and downs in his life. And that first book that I did, I actually did gratis because I wanted to see if it was something that I enjoyed doing myself, actually writing, interviewing. I wanted to see how I felt about it. And also it gave me something to show to prospective clients looking ahead. It gave me an actual touchy-feely published book to show them as a sample of what these can be.
And it was sort of interesting because I was glancing at the book that you wrote about the woman, Joan Hulkauer, who you said she lost her life falling. And you know, she served in the Israeli military. I mean, she really seemed to have a really interesting story. Do some families give the books to the local libraries?
Actually, that particular book is in both a public library and a synagogue library. John Holkauer's life story. So that's a spot on question. That's actually in 2 libraries, and occasionally the books will go on sale. The book I had mentioned about the perhaps world's youngest Holocaust survivor, that book is on sale online right now. I have nothing at all to do with the book sale. I turn everything over to my client, and they do with it as they wish. And in that particular case, they shared it with friends, colleagues, employees, and they're also selling it online.
That is, that is great, because this, especially when you're talking about Holocaust survivors, or if you have a World War II veterans, this is something that libraries, could benefit from.
Absolutely. A lot of these stories are fascinating, and a lot of these stories contain details and information that in a million years, most of us never would have guessed could have occurred, would have occurred until you read their stories.
In Greenburgh, we have a living histories story. We have interviewed 150 veterans of World War II and the Korean conflict. And every Memorial Day and Veterans Day, we air the stories nonstop on public access TV, and it takes about 3-4 days to air everything, because it's each interview is about 30 minutes long, and then we have footage of their service in the military, and it really is something that people appreciate, and people look at it, and they really don't know about the local heroes.
That's fantastic that Greenburgh has created this archive. That's really to be applauded.
Yeah, and this is sort of another aspect of that. I'm wondering if it would be interesting to have like a book not only about an individuals, but maybe about a group. So if there's like a veterans group in a community, maybe a book about local heroes.
That's a fantastic idea. There are community histories that are sometimes written. I know that a book was recently written about the Ritchie Boys. The Ritchie Boys were World War II veterans, most of whom were born in Central and Eastern Europe, emigrated to the U.S., joined the U.S. military during World War II, and ended up going back to Europe to interrogate captured mostly German soldiers. And so their story is told in several books right now, the World War II Ritchie Boys.
Have you ever found a family that doesn't have an interesting story?
Not really. Again, many families will say, our story's been humdrum. But again, after speaking with them for a while, you'll learn that that really is not a humdrum family history at all.
Right, and even somebody who has a boring story may actually have interesting aspects of their life.
Absolutely, absolutely. They might even have an unusual hobby. They may like traveling to a very unpopular part of the world. Who knows? There are just so many factors to each of us. Each of us is such a mosaic of so many interests and characteristics and traits that that at the end of the day, we all have an interesting story to share.
Which is really a great a great thought. I'm Paul Feiner, and we'll be right back with Ellen Bergman.
1460 WVOX.
Now back to the Greenburgh Report on 1460 WVOX. Once again, here's Greenburgh Town Supervisor Paul Feiner.
Hi, I'm Paul Feiner. I'm the Greenburgh Town Supervisor. My guest is Ellen Bergman, and he has a company that helps you preserve your family histories, because they write biographies, books about individuals and loved ones. And if people want to get in touch with you, how do they do so?
So, multiple ways. One way is through my website, which is lifestoriespreserved.net, or by email. My email address is info@lifestoriespreserved.net.
And that's with a D, preserved.
Right, ED at the end, yes.
Great. In terms of, if people are not sure whether or not this is for them, what should they do?
That's a good question. So I have many conversations with people, and I ask them just to share a little bit about their history, if they're themselves are considering a biography, or their parents' history, if the book is about their parents. And by the way, I've been hired most often by adult children of individuals. I have been mostly hired by people in their 40s, 50s, and 60s asking me to write about a parent or parents. But just to address your question, to answer your question, Paul, usually a 5 to 10 minute conversation will kind of be enough to determine whether or not there's enough substance there to produce a biography.
One of the thoughts that I just had is, do people want the good and bad to be reported in a book, or do they want to just forget the bad and just sort of like exaggerate the good? Is that a good question, or?
That's a great question with a multiple part answer. So sometimes I hear stories from my biography subjects that strain my credibility a little bit, that I wonder, is that story really accurate? Is that story really true? But the client is the client, and if this is what they want to tell me, if this is what they want in the book, then I will include it, whether or not I think it's true. Like all of us, the biography subjects that I've written about have all had victories and defeats, and very often these defeats have proven to be learning experiences. They've had good takeaways from bad things that have occurred in their lives. The book that I'm writing right now, the individual was married at age 17, not because he wanted to be, but because he was essentially forced into it. But essentially, it was a learning experience, and it made him mature in a hurry.
Did he stay married?
He stayed married for 20 years, but that was it. But a lot of these books do describe both positive and negative experiences within the individual's life.
And I guess sometimes if it's all positives, nobody's going to read the book. So people want to read a more balanced book. It will give it more credibility.
Absolutely. A more balanced book is a more credible book. And the truth is, all of us have had our ups and downs. We've all had our victories and defeats. And when those defeats are in there, it makes the biography subject seem more relatable, perhaps more humble. And I think it makes the story go a little further.
Right. And sometimes you have to convince the family member to, to accept putting negative stuff in.
That's true. A couple of times I've said to people, this is an important piece of your story. This is something that you need to share. And usually they come over, but not always.
Great. You mentioned before that politicians are usually less humble. So would they be harder subjects to write about?
Well, politicians are generous in terms of providing material. They're not anxious or shy to speak about themselves. And again, it's been my experience that they may take a little bit more credit than what's due, but this is their story and this is the way they want to tell it, and that's fine.
That's right. I was going to take credit for the weather today.
Feel free.
That's right. But actually, you can't take credit for the weather because it's global warming.
Unfortunately, yes.
In terms of like people taking notes and diaries, do you ever look at family, diaries, and does that help you write a book?
The answer is absolutely yes. A number of people who I've written about have done journaling through the years or have kept diaries through the years. And if they're willing to share those, it makes my life easier. And in many cases, it may reveal something that occurred 25 years ago or 40 years ago that may not be front and center in their minds today. So any family notes or family histories or journals or diaries go a long way in putting together a biography today.
Are there any other companies like yours around?
I classify myself as what's called a personal historian, and there are a scattering of personal historians throughout the United States. There used to be something called the Association of Personal Historians, which was a professional organization, which unfortunately, because of fiscal mismanagement, they closed down 4 or 5 years ago. But there are a number of personal historians across the country. There are also, of course, biographers. There are also memoirists. And many of us have seen the celebrity memoir. And very often the celebrity memoir was not actually authored by the celebrity, but was in fact written by a ghostwriter. And once in a while, once in a blue moon, that ghostwriter will receive credit on the celebrity's biography or celebrity's memoir, but that's unusual. That's the exception.
That is, really interesting. So you've done. What are you writing now again?
So again, right now I'm writing the rags to riches story of an 86-year-old who resides in New Jersey. At one time, he owned as many as 25 auto dealerships throughout the country concurrently. But he's also been involved in complicated international dealings. He's also constructed homes in several states. He's pretty much a self-made man who has found a lot of success in many different ventures, and he's also been tremendously philanthropic. And one of his biggest philanthropic ventures, which will have a chapter dedicated to it in the book, is that he provides employment to ex-cons, especially ex-cons who were military veterans. He gets them jobs within the state of New Jersey and kind of gets them on the straight and narrow after being released from prison. So besides being a successful business person, he's also done tremendous philanthropic work through the years.
That is really, really great. It's really amazing. You see like so many people and everybody has a story to tell. And most people don't appreciate the fact that other people's stories are also fascinating.
Absolutely. And again, sometimes it takes some digging to bring those stories to the surface, but we all have interesting stories.
Do you have any interesting stories about yourself that...
Well, it's a tough one to answer.
Or your family?
I think the most interesting story about myself, perhaps, is that I was working in advertising upon graduating from college, and I wasn't quite getting to the part of advertising. I wanted to get into copywriting. I was having trouble breaking into copywriting. So I joined the family business, which was graphic arts in Manhattan. And I joined saying, I'm going to be here for a month or 2 or 3, and that's it. And my father, who was the one who offered me a job, shortly thereafter was diagnosed with Lou Gehrig's disease, quickly passed away. And instead of spending a month or 2 or 3 at the company, I spent 40 years there. So,
Wow.
so my career didn't quite work out as I had envisioned, but at the end of the day, it's fine.
Great. So people should just think about all the amazing stories that they have, and if they don't have a book about them, they might want to write something down and then share it to their grandchildren and great grandchildren, and something that will be really appreciated years from now.
Absolutely. Unfortunately, too many of us know too little about our forefathers and foremothers. I mentioned that my father passed. He passed at a young age. I never had the opportunity to ask him about his war experience. He was in a number of battles. He was in the U.S. Navy during World War II. And it never occurred to me to ask him about those stories, and he never volunteered anything about them. And today I say I should have, as so many people are saying about their forefathers. I have a great grandmother who divorced just after the turn of the century. I can't begin to imagine what could have motivated her to seek a divorce in 1905. I mean, that was scandalous and tremendously unusual in that day. So again, there are many stories that I have passed, that I have missed, and I'm sure that all of us are going around saying, I should have, I wish I had interviewed my grandmother, I wish I had asked my father, et cetera, et cetera.
Great. Thank you very much for joining us, and best wishes.
My pleasure. Thank you for having me.
Thank you. And one last comment, these books probably, as time goes on, become more and more valuable. So people may look at the book, and then 10 years from now or 20 years from now, it will be a real treasure.
Absolutely. And essentially, these stories are timeless.
Great. I'm Paul Feiner, Greenburgh Town Supervisor.